Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 10th of June. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your news' morning show that brings you all the stories driving the day. Coming up, escalation in the Middle East. Iran has launched a missile attack on a US airbase in Jordan after President Donald Trump blamed Tehran for the downing of an American Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. The attack comes as members of the UN Security Council remain divided over sanctions linked to Iran's nuclear programme. Meanwhile, in southern Lebanon, Israel has carried out airstrikes that caused a number of deaths and many serious injuries. As locals flee to safety, Iran has warned of, quote, crushing measures if Israel continues its assault. And here in Brussels, EU leaders are rolling out the red carpet today for South Korean President Lee. The EU-South Korea summit takes place as part of his 10-day tour of Europe, which will culminate at the G7 summit in France next week. But first, the US has launched multiple waves of strikes on Iran in response to a military helicopter crash off the Strait of Hormuz. Reports say the helicopter went down after colliding with an Iranian drone, but it's not clear whether the collision was intentional. In a post on social media, Donald Trump says that there were two pilots involved, both safe and uninjured. Nevertheless, the United States must, of necessity, respond to this attack. Soon after, Iran said no attack would go unanswered and launched retaliatory attacks against a number of US bases in Bahrain. For analysis, we're joined now by General Dominique Trinquant, a retired French Army general and former head of France's military mission to the UN in New York, an expert in international security, peacekeeping operations and military strategy. Good morning, General. Good to have you with us on the programme. Now, these latest developments severely threaten the fragile ceasefire, which has seen already many clashes inside and outside the strait. From your perspective, how close is the ceasefire to complete collapse?
You need to be careful about what you're calling a ceasefire. It's just a declaration. There is no agreement, in fact. So the declaration by the US of a ceasefire means that it's up to the US to decide if there is a breach or not, because there is no agreement with the Iranians. So we are no longer at war. We are not yet at peace. We are just in between. And each time there is a problem, of course, they use the force. That was the case after the shutdown of the helicopter and the strike by the Iranian and the strike by the US. But they declare that they are still at ceasefire.
And how bad could it get? What is the military endgame here, do you think?
Military endgame is difficult. I think it will last very long because the US want to get out from this trap. The Iranian don't care if their people are killed. They don't care if there is a real ceasefire because they've got now a very powerful government in Iran because there is no opposition at all. And because of the strike by the US in Iran is reinforcing the power in Tehran. And so it can last long, but they want to have an agreement to ease the economical sanction. And of course, the US are the only one to negotiate with the Iranian, neither the Israeli nor the European, no one else. And so it's only up to President Trump to show that he has won something.
And that's the thing. President Trump tends to change his mind every 5 minutes. Can diplomacy hold at all at any stage? Have you any hope for a diplomatic end to this?
There will be only a diplomatic end because war will not change anything. We've been at war for 3 months now with one very severe war with many strikes and nothing happened in the change. At the contrary, now Hormuz is controlled by the Iranian. So I think that only diplomatic movement can change something, but it will be very difficult because the Iranians are really in a powerful situation now.
And just finally, your thoughts on Lebanon. Do you think Lebanon could hold the key to the future of this war?
Yes, of course, because the US didn't care about Lebanon. In fact, only Israel wanted to defeat the Hezbollah. And the Iranians now are saying that without changing the situation in Lebanon, there will be no agreement between Iran and the US. But for Israel, it's the safety of Israel is at stake. So it is very difficult. The agreement inside Lebanon is that Hezbollah must be disarmed, but Hezbollah is very powerful now in Lebanon.
Okay, General Dominique Trinquant, thank you so much for your time this morning and for joining us here on Europe Today. Now, moving on, the Commission President has proposed a fresh round of sanctions against Russia, targeting oil sales, the so-called shadow fleet, banks and even soldiers involved in the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For the latest, we're joined here on set by our correspondent, Jorge Liboreyro, who's been following the previous 20 packages of sanctions for us. So you're quite an expert, I must say, on the topic. So tell us, what are the new elements in this package?
There's a lot of continuation in this package, right? Because one of the main elements is the price cap on Russian oil. We know it's been there since 2022. What happened with the price cap is rather funny because last year we made the cap dynamic to reflect the market trends. So because the price of Russian oil was going down, the price cap went down as well. But this year is the opposite. What happened with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the price of Russian oil drastically went up. So now we're staring at a review that will go upwards instead of downwards with the cap. So what the Commission has proposed is to delay this review completely until January next year. So the price cap will stay at what it is now, which is $44 per barrel. Now, besides the cap, what do we have in this package? We have shadow fleet vessels, we have Russian banks, we have cryptocurrency firms that have been accused of enabling circumvention. We have, for the first time, fisheries. We have several metals that are used for weapons. We do not have alumina, which is the raw material that Ireland is accused of providing to Russia. And we also have, which is very interesting, very striking element in this proposal, a ban on soldiers who have taken part in the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And this is how Ursula von der Leyen yesterday justified the measure.
We propose for the first time to ban from entry into the European Union anyone who has served in the Russian armed forces since the beginning of the war. So, Europe stays off limit for anyone who has participated in the invasion of Ukraine. As simple as that.
Quite an interesting proposal there, Jorge. Where did this come from and is it feasible?
The proposal to ban Russian soldiers from the Schengen area came from Estonia. They put it on the table earlier this year. At first it was just them, but then it gradually gained support from other member states because they are concerned about the security risks that these soldiers could pose if they come to Europe after the war is over. So now the Commission has endorsed the proposal, has put it there in the 21st package of sanctions. But there are many questions because we're talking about an enormous amount of people. I was just checking the numbers, and there's an estimated 5,600,000 soldiers in Ukraine, deployed there from Russia. So how do we ban so many people? Well, first of all, we need to identify them. Who are they? Where are they? Where do they come from? And then once we have these identities put in place, we can establish a system to systematically deny them entry into the Schengen area. So let's see how this proposal actually works in practice. What are the feasibilities, the technicalities, but the goal is to have the sanctions approved by mid-July.
Okay, Jorge, thank you so much for that update. And you can read more, of course, about all those technicalities on euronews.com. But now, in a major blow to the French President Emmanuel Macron, France and Germany have shelved a project to jointly build a next-generation fighter jet. The project was seen as a key test of European efforts to work more closely together on defence. For more, we can go straight to Berlin and bring in our correspondent, Laura Fleischmann. Good morning, Laura. Just tell us what happened with this project. Why did it fall apart?
Good morning to you too, Maeve. And, well, the German Airbus and France's Dassault Aviation have come to an end of their talks about a potential FCAS project working together on a next generation fighter jet because they couldn't agree on how to work together. Apparently, Dassault tried to take on a leadership role, tried to take a bigger share of the work, and Airbus was not too happy with that. Also, there were disagreements regarding potential patent rights on new developments and problems with different military requirements by France and by Germany. France needs a nuclear-capable jet and one that can also land on aircraft carriers. And Germany is not a nuclear power and also does not have an aircraft carrier, so this was not on top of the list for Germany. And this now is a serious blow to Europe's defense, and that especially during challenging times in terms of security, looking at Ukraine, looking at the tense transatlantic relations currently. But potentially a new next-generation fighter jet might not be completely off the table, since Airbus has now proposed to the German Defense Ministry that there could be a new next-generation fighter jet in cooperation with other companies, but this time without France.
OK, Laura Fleischmann, thank you so much for that live update there from Berlin. Now, the European Commission has reacted to a controversial luxury development project on Albania's coast that's linked to the US President Donald Trump's family. The plans, as you might have seen, have sparked protests that are now in their second week. They're called the Flamingo Revolution because the wetland is home to flamingos, seals and sea turtle nesting sites. But Eddie Rama, who's on the path towards EU membership, says they could modernise Albania. For more, I'm joined here in the studio by our correspondent, Mairead Gwynn. Just remind us, Mairead, why is this making waves and what exactly is this luxury tourism development?
So as you said there, Maeve, this is a luxury real estate project that would see over 1.4 billion euros invested into building tourism sites on some of Albania's most protected ecological areas, home to endangered species, as you mentioned there. And the investor firm, which is called Affinity Partners, behind this is actually headed by Jared Kushner, who is, of course, the son-in-law of President Trump. His wife, Ivanka Trump, actually spoke about how the seed of this idea was first planted last week. She told a US podcast show, "We were on a friend's boat and we stopped for a swim. Effectively, that's how we found it. We swam to the island, we went on a hike, barefoot all the way to the top, and we were just captivated," she said. She's referring there to Sazan Islands, one of the sites of this development project. And it's in the Adriatic coast off Albania, a sea off Albania's coast. And essentially, this has really touched on a nerve in the Albanian national conscience because of the ecologically protected nature of these sites, but also because there's a fear that this is about cultural identity, about national sovereignty, that billionaires can essentially snap up parts of the Albanian coast. And that's why, Maeve, we've seen these really fierce protests now in their second week.
And of course, Brussels has weighed in. How's the European Commission been reacting to all this?
Well, yes, they weighed in yesterday. I asked a question to the European Commission. I asked if they were assessing these plans' compatibility with EU environmental rules, because remember, Albania is a candidate country. It's considered a front-runner, second in line after Montenegro to join the bloc. And to do that, it has to align with the EU's stringent rules on environmental protection. I asked this, and this is what a spokesperson for the Commission had to say.
We have already expressed concerns to the Minister of the Environment about the potential shortcomings of this project. Finally, let me stress that Albania should refrain from action that could undermine the fulfillment of the closing benchmark, and we expect the Albanian authorities to act without delay.
So Brussels not yet saying explicitly that this is in breach of their rules, but a clearly veiled warning there. The Commission calling on the Albanian authorities to act without delay. And finally, Maeve, I think we'll hear more from this, because the Commission also said that they had already concerns about Albanian laws on strategic investments, that they essentially allow billionaires to evade some of the rules on scrutiny and so on. And now pressure is really building on Eddie Rama. He's been defending these plans, really doubling down. But as these protests continue, and with concerns clearly being expressed from Brussels, I think there's going to be increasing pressure on him.
Certainly a story that everyone is watching. Mara Gwynne-Jones, thank you so much there for your reporting. And now moving on, as the European Union seeks to shield its market from a surge of low-cost Chinese imports, Chinese companies are advertising ways to circumvent the bloc's tariff barriers. According to an exclusive story by our trade reporter Peggy Corlin, several EU countries have alerted the European Commission of new, increasingly blurred and complex actions. That's all to avoid paying these duties. For more, our very own Peggy Corlin is here with us in the studio. Tell us more about your reporting.
Hi, Maeve. Let me explain first what the situation is. The EU is currently facing massive flood of Chinese cheap imports overcapacities, which are threatening to sweep away entire sectors of the EU industry, such as the car industry, the steel industry, or the chemicals. And to defend themselves, European producers lodge more and more complaints to the European Commission, asking the Commission to impose what is called anti-dumping duties, which hit products which are sold on the EU market at a price below the Chinese market. These are extra tariff. And what I've found is that some Chinese companies openly advertise online ways to bypass these tariffs.
And how? What tactics are they using?
Well, they promote online in social media, in LinkedIn posts that we have found and published. They promote ways, for instance, to use transshipments through so-called gateway countries, which are countries not hit by EU tariffs, like Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, or Vietnam, where they pretend that the product has been produced, which is not the case. It has been made in China at 100%. And they offer fake certificate of origins. And for instance, and you have another way, which is to slightly change the product so that the custom code is changed and they avoid the duties. And for that, I found that a specific product, which is strategic for the airspace industry and the green energy, which is a chemical called titanium dioxide, some Chinese companies offer products made at 80% of titanium dioxide and not 100% to avoid duties which have been imposed in 2025 by the European Commission.
OK, Peggy Corlin, thank you so much for that update. And another story, of course, that will be keeping our Peggy Corlin busy today is the EU-South Korean summit taking place this afternoon. Trade, of course, very much on the agenda, but also deepening defence ties. Our Jakob Yanis takes a closer look.
How's your Wednesday? Because today, European leaders Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen are hosting South Korean President Lee Jae-myung for the EU Republic of Korea summit. Meanwhile, their northern neighbors in Pyongyang have a busy schedule hosting China. Look, your reporter won't cover every single summit here, but this one matters. And if anyone asks why the EU quarter is buzzing, let the president explain.
Oh, I'm preparing for the EU-Korea summit next week. Listen. Indeed, but our partnership and friendship with Korea is not only about K-pop, it's much, much more.
Alright, so if it is not just about K-pop, what is it about then? The big news is a newly finalized digital trade agreement, which sets binding rules for data flows and e-commerce. But the real driver here is defense and geopolitics. And following a security pact which was signed 2 years ago, the EU is rapidly fortifying ties across the Indo-Pacific. And amid rising tensions, some EU politicians are even pitching a NATO-style economic deterrence pact with Seoul to block trade coercion from Washington or Beijing. And we are not talking about pocket money here. Total trade topped over 120 billion euros last year. And it's a busy two-way street. Europe mainly sends over factory machinery and chemical products. But in return, Europeans buy a huge number of South Korean cars, microchips and home electronics. And South Korea is a tech powerhouse, spending nearly 5% of its GDP on research, which, by the way, is more than double the European average. Their microchips and batteries power Europe's everyday economy, backed by heavy Korean investments inside Germany, Poland and Hungary. And Europeans are rapidly entering an era where international security is just as much about safeguarding microchip supplies and electric vehicle batteries as it is about traditional military firepower. But look, if you are still not sold on the high-stakes world of semiconductor defense, there's always the K-pop left for you.
And that was, of course, our Jakob Yanis reporting for us there. Let us know how you feel about either K-pop or the EU-South Korea summit. You can write to us at europetoday@euronews.com. But that does bring this edition to an end. Thank you so much for your company, as always, and see you soon here on Euronews.